The first letter showed up taped to my front door, typed in all caps like it was written by a furious raccoon with a law degree. "Cease and desist," it screamed. I stood there in my driveway, coffee in hand, reading about how my new mailbox, yes, my mailbox violated some obscure HOA design rule. It had the audacity to be black instead of regulation beige. I live in a quiet Arizona suburb, the kind where you can hear sprinklers click on at exactly 6 in the morning. My name's Travis Alder, and I moved here for peace and quiet after leaving behind a career in city zoning enforcement. I know property law, but apparently that made me public enemy number 1 to the Oak Haven HOA president, Tammy Cranford. Tammy was a textbook HOA Karen 50-something with a permanent scowl, sun visor, and a clipboard that might as well have been surgically attached. She once fined a neighbor for having excessively enthusiastic Halloween decorations. That neighbor had a single plastic skeleton on their porch. 2 days after the first letter, I got another one, this time from legal counsel. It was on shady-looking letterhead from a firm I'd never heard of, Henderson and Blythe Property Enforcement Division. The letter threatened me with a lawsuit if I didn't replace my mailbox and pay a design violation fee of $800. I read it twice. Something felt off. The letter didn't even list a bar number. The signature at the bottom just said G. Blythe-esque. In a font that looked suspiciously like Times New Roman bold. No contact number, no address, just a P.O. box. I called the Arizona Bar Association. No such lawyer. No such firm. The next morning, I ran into Tammy while walking my dog. She had that smug look like she just cornered a squirrel with her bare hands. "Travis, I assume you got the letter from our legal department," she asked, her voice thick with fake politeness. "Yeah, I did." "Funny thing though, your lawyer doesn't exist." Her face twitched. "Excuse me," I checked. "There's no G. Blythe, no Henderson and Blythe. You sent a fake legal threat, Tammy." Tammy's smile froze in place. "We're well within our rights. You agreed to abide by HOA regulations when you moved in. And you agreed not to impersonate legal professionals. That's a felony, Tammy." She scoffed and walked away without another word. That's when I knew something deeper was going on, so I hired a real attorney. Not just any attorney, my old friend Tori Ashland, sharp as a tack and someone who absolutely lives to tear apart corrupt bureaucracies. We met that same afternoon. "You're telling me they fabricated a law firm?" she asked, flipping through the letters. "Yep. And they're using these to threaten homeowners into paying fake fines." "Oh, this is going to be fun," she said, already reaching for her laptop. By the end of the day, we had a plan, but first I needed evidence. Real evidence, so I started talking to my neighbors. Turns out, I wasn't the only one. 7 others had received similar letters over the last year. One couple even paid over $1,000 to avoid legal trouble. Nobody questioned it. Tammy's intimidation tactics had worked for months. What she didn't expect was someone like me. Someone who'd been on the other side of this mess before. I set up a meeting with the HOA board. I demanded it be recorded. They agreed, reluctantly. The fake lawyer would come up, I'd press them, and we'd catch them lying on tape. Tammy didn't show up alone. She brought 2 other board members, Ron, who always looked half asleep, and Linda, who nodded at everything Tammy said like a malfunctioning bobblehead. As soon as I brought up the fake law firm, Tammy leaned forward. "We have retained legal counsel. You're not entitled to their personal details." Tori, sitting beside me, calmly opened her folder. "Actually, under Arizona's HOA statutes, any legal representation acting on behalf of the board must be disclosed to dues-paying members, which Travis is." Tammy's lips thinned. "We don't have to explain ourselves to you." "Oh, but you do," Tori said, sliding a copy of the Arizona revised statutes across the table. "And you've got a much bigger problem." Tammy looked at it, then up at me. I smiled. "You see, impersonating an attorney. That's a crime." Her eyes finally betrayed her. That was the moment I knew Tammy wasn't just bluffing, she was drowning, and I was going to be the one who pulled the plug. Tammy didn't speak again for the remainder of that meeting. Her eyes darted back and forth between Tori and the statute like she was trying to will the words into rearranging themselves. Ron blinked slowly, while Linda chewed on her lips so hard I thought she might draw blood. Tori stood up and collected the papers. "We'll be submitting a formal complaint to the state's Attorney General. Also, the Arizona Department of Real Estate has jurisdiction over HOA misconduct. I expect they'll be very interested in the fabricated legal correspondence your board has been distributing." Linda finally broke her silence. "Wait, that's not necessary. We can sort this internally." Tori didn't even pause. Too late for that. The meeting ended without any further protest. Outside the clubhouse, I caught the sound of Ron muttering something about needing a drink. I didn't blame him. If half of what we suspected was true, things were about to get a lot worse for them. Over the next week, we gathered everything. Tori filed open records requests. I canvassed the neighborhood with a clipboard and a calm, friendly face. I didn't push, just asked if anyone had ever received unusual threats or fines from the HOA. People talked. Once the first few stories came out, the rest followed fast. The same fake law firm name appeared repeatedly, always on the same shoddy letterhead, always with no contact information, and all demanding various processing fees or legal resolution costs. We counted 17 households in total. Every letter traced back to Tammy's personal printer, confirmed after Tori subpoenaed the HOA's internal correspondence and hardware records. The board had no record of ever approving a legal retainer. In fact, several of the fines had been collected in cash left in envelopes in Tammy's mailbox. We brought everything to the state licensing board and the Attorney General's office. What followed moved faster than I expected. Within days, investigators from the AG's office were asking questions. A forensic accountant was assigned to review the HOA's books. It didn't take long to find the shortfalls. The board had been moving money around through what they called discretionary maintenance accounts, which didn't appear in the annual reports sent to homeowners. The final blow came when a neighbor, Mr. Kwon, a retired Air Force logistics officer, admitted he had been asked to donate toward an emergency legal fund after a supposed lawsuit from a contractor. He paid $3,000. We showed him the documents proving no such lawsuit ever existed. "I knew something didn't feel right," he said quietly, holding the papers, "but I didn't want to cause trouble." "You didn't," I replied. "They did." The AG's office issued a cease and desist order to the Oak Haven board. Tammy was served the same day. I watched from across the street as a plainclothes investigator handed her the envelope. She tried to slam the door in his face. He wedged his foot in and said something low and calm that made her freeze. She took the papers without another word. The very next morning, the HOA's official website went dark. The board claimed it was under maintenance, but we knew better. They were scrambling. Meanwhile, Tori filed a civil suit on behalf of all 17 homeowners who had received fraudulent letters. Our motion sought restitution, punitive damages, and a full audit of the board's actions over the last 5 years. We filed it publicly and made sure it hit the local news cycle. That's when things got loud. The local paper ran a headline that read, "Fake law firm, real trouble, HOA accused of fraud." Reporters showed up in front of Tammy's house. She drew the blinds and refused to come out, but the damage was spreading. The HOA's insurance provider dropped their liability coverage. Their bank froze the maintenance fund account pending an internal fraud investigation. Ron resigned from the board by email. Linda followed 2 hours later. Tammy held out 3 more days before giving up her position due to health reasons. No one believed her. With the board dissolved, the state appointed a temporary administrator, someone from the Department of Real Estate, to oversee operations and prepare for a new election. For the first time in years, the homeowners had a voice. We held a community meeting at the public library. Over 50 people showed up. I didn't plan to speak, but people started asking questions. Eventually, someone handed me the mic. "I didn't want to fight," I said. "I wanted to be left alone." But when people start abusing power and threatening their neighbors with fake lawyers just to pad their own pockets, someone has to stand up. This isn't about mailboxes, it's about trust, and they broke it. The room broke into applause. I sat down, a little embarrassed but grateful. The community had woken up. Tori kept pushing forward. During discovery, we uncovered even more. Tammy had routed over $10,000 in fines directly into a personal checking account registered to a shell company. Blythe Solutions. The bank records were crystal clear. The name was fake, the account was real, and the money trail burned like a fuse. The Attorney General's office filed criminal charges against her wire fraud, forgery, and misappropriation of public funds. She was arrested and released on bond pending trial. Her mugshot made the evening news. While prosecutors built their case, we pursued the civil side. Tori didn't just want restitution, she wanted a judgment that would make sure no HOA board in the state ever tried something like this again. We asked for treble damages under the state's fraud statutes. The court agreed. We won. The court ordered Tammy to pay nearly $200,000 in damages. The judgment included a lien against her property and garnished her pension. The other board members were found jointly liable for restitution, though the court acknowledged they were likely manipulated or misled to some extent. Still, they weren't innocent. The fake law firm scheme became a case study at the state's HOA regulatory agency. They issued new compliance guidelines requiring all boards to publicly register any legal representation and disclose all fees collected from residents. The Oak Haven scandal, as it came to be known, triggered reform legislation in the state Senate. I didn't run for the new board. I didn't want power, just peace. But I did help draft the community charter amendments that gave homeowners more oversight and required external audits every year. We also added a clause that allowed residents to vote to dissolve the HOA entirely if 2/3 agreed, just in case. The new board was elected with full transparency. No one who had been involved with the previous administration was allowed to run. The new president was a retired school principal named Maria, the kind of woman who once told her 5th graders to keep their hands visible at all times and meant it. She kept things simple, fair, and honest. As for me, I finally painted the mailbox with a fresh coat of black. Glossy this time, just because I could. 2 months after the court ruling, the neighborhood finally stopped holding its breath. Yards looked greener, people waved again, and the hush that had settled over the block lifted. But while most folks were relieved just to see the HOA dismantled, I felt something gnawing at the back of my mind. We'd exposed the fake law firm, proven the fraud, even helped set a legal precedent. But there was still one thing that hadn't been answered. Where did the money actually go? According to court records, Tammy had funneled nearly $20,000 into her account under the phony legal processing fees. But only about $6,000 had been recovered. The rest, gone. Claimed to be spent or unavailable. The forensic accountant flagged multiple withdrawals in cash, often in odd increments, $700 here, $950 there. No receipts, no invoices, nothing to back them up. That's when I called in a favor. My cousin Drew worked for the county's financial crimes unit. He'd kept a low profile during the civil case to avoid any conflict of interest, but now that the board had dissolved and the criminal trial loomed, he was free to dig. He met me at a diner just off Route 87 where we could talk without running into neighbors. "She's hiding something," Drew said, flipping his tablet around to show me a map. "These withdrawals. They track to a series of locations in Mesa and Temp. Cash-only storage units, check caching spots, even one wire transfer to a prepaid debit account registered under a fake name." I leaned over the screen. "So she's laundering HOA money. Looks that way. And get this, 2 of the addresses she visited are linked to a man named Peter Crane. He's been on a watch list for real estate fraud since last year. Guess who incorporated the shell company Blythe Solutions?" My stomach tightened. "You're saying Tammy didn't act alone?" That's what we're starting to believe. Crane has a history of partnering with HOA officials, usually in small communities with weak oversight. He poses as legal counsel, creates fake enforcement mechanisms, and then disappears once the scheme dries up. I sat back, stunned. She brought in a professional con artist. Worse. She may have known him personally. We found emails encrypted, but some headers survived. They go back almost a year before the first fake legal letter showed up. I rubbed my face, trying to process it. So we've got wire fraud, conspiracy, laundering, and potentially racketeering, Drew finished. We're coordinating with the state prosecutor now. Just wanted to give you a heads up before this thing explodes. The next morning, police cruisers rolled into Oak Haven again. This time, they weren't here for paperwork. A warrant had been issued for Tammy's arrest on additional charges based on new evidence. Officers knocked on her door just after sunrise. She didn't open it. They forced entry under judicial authorization. What they found inside stunned everyone. Her garage had been converted into what could only be described as a miniature operations hub. File cabinets stuffed with resident profiles, copies of checks, photocopies of driver's licenses, even private security footage from several doorbell cameras that residents had never consented to share. And in one locked drawer, they found a ledger detailing collection targets and projected penalties, handwritten and annotated with notes like soft target and threat level low. It was a hit list, personalized, categorized, and monetized. The media took the story national within 48 hours. Tori called me the morning the news hit cable. "We've got a bigger problem now," she said, her voice urgent. "This isn't just a scam. This is organized coercion. And the state's about to treat it like organized crime." Tammy's bail was revoked. She was remanded into custody pending trial. Meanwhile, Peter Crane vanished. The FBI posted a notice asking for public help locating him, describing him as armed, manipulative, and known to impersonate legal professionals. A reward was offered. Around that time, a letter showed up at my door. No return address, just my name typed on the front. Inside was a single page printed in sharp, clean font. "You should have kept your head down." No signature, no traceable marks, but the message was clear. I handed it to Drew. "That's a threat, right?" He didn't even blink. "It's intimidation, and it means whoever's left is nervous, which is good. It means they're losing." They weren't just losing, they were unraveling. The temporary state-appointed administrator found deeper irregularities in the HOA's past 5 years of accounting. Whole budgets had been falsified. Community improvement projects that had never occurred were listed as expenses. One entry claimed nearly $4,000 for pest mitigation around a retention basin that had never seen a single spray. Another referenced electrical upgrades to a non-existent community center. Residents were furious, not just at Tammy, but at themselves for letting it happen, so we took action. A group of us formed a neighborhood oversight committee, not an HOA, just a volunteer group that met monthly to review shared concerns, propose ideas, and keep each other informed. We pooled funds to hire an independent auditor and invited a city council liaison to attend meetings. Transparency became our rallying cry. But the story didn't end there. 3 weeks into the Oversight Committee's work, we discovered something buried in the original HOA charter, an obscure clause that granted the board authority to reallocate communal assets in the event of financial duress. The clause had been used to justify a quiet sale of a parcel of land at the neighborhood's edge. That land, it had been transferred to a holding company registered under a different name, the buyer, a limited liability corporation tied to, of course, Peter Crane. The property had since been flipped for a hefty profit. We alerted the authorities. The assistant AG added property fraud to the growing list of charges. Tori filed a motion to recover the asset's value and redirect it back into a restitution fund for affected homeowners. We won that too. The court ruled that the sale was made under fraudulent authority and ordered the LLC's proceeds to be seized. It wasn't easy. The ownership trail had been scrubbed through shell companies and offshore entries, but the evidence was overwhelming. Crane's name was added to Interpol's watch list. Tammy, facing over a dozen charges and no bargaining power left, finally agreed to cooperate. Her testimony confirmed everything: the scheme, the forgeries, the payments, the threats. She admitted to recruiting Crane after meeting him at a community leadership seminar he hosted under an alias. The plan had been to extract as much money as possible from non-compliant residents, then dissolve the board under the guise of burnout. There was even a timeline. The judge called it a calculated abuse of authority with a deliberate strategy to exploit and intimidate. Her sentence was 23 years. No parole for the first 12. We held a neighborhood potluck the week after the sentencing. Kids played in the cul-de-sac while parents chatted over folding tables. Someone brought ribs, someone else set up a DIY lemonade bar. It felt normal. Safe. Like we'd earned our peace. I walked to the edge of the property line, right where the old HOA sign used to stand before we tore it down. The sun was setting behind the trees, casting long shadows across the pavement. Tori joined me, holding 2 paper cups. "You ever think about what would have happened if you just changed the mailbox?" she asked. I took a sip. "Every day, and then I remember, they picked the wrong guy," she nodded. "They always do, until they don't." We stood there in silence, watching the street lights flicker on one by one. The neighborhood had healed, the fear was gone, and the people who tried to control us with fake power, they were the ones who lost everything. 3 months passed. The legal dust had settled, but Oak Haven was still adjusting to life after its reckoning. The community no longer operated under fear or silence. People had started reclaiming their agency in small but meaningful ways. Porch lights turned on earlier. Old neighbors reconnected. Kids chalked hopscotch grids across sidewalks that had once been patrolled for excessive markings. But just as the neighborhood began to breathe easy, a quiet knock came at my door one Saturday morning. It was Drew. He looked more serious than usual, holding a manila folder that bore no markings. "You're going to want to see this," he said, stepping inside. He set the folder on my kitchen table and opened it to reveal a set of photographs, surveillance stills. One showed a man in a blazer entering a nondescript office plaza in Scottsdale. Another showed the same man 2 days later walking out with a briefcase. The timestamp matched a date just before Tammy had been arrested. "Is that Crane?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Confirmed." But here's the twist: he wasn't working alone. The office he entered, it's a registered address for a property management firm called Paragon Ridge Holdings. I leaned closer. "That name's not familiar." "It wouldn't be," Drew said. "They're a holding firm that specializes in acquiring distressed HOA-managed communities. They target neighborhoods on the verge of collapse and offer restructuring solutions, except what they actually do is install puppet boards, drain any remaining funds, and sell off common assets through shell buyers. Then they vanish." I felt the old tension return. "You're saying Oak Haven was next, already in motion?" Tammy had been negotiating a quiet transfer of management authority over to them. If you hadn't exposed her when you did, the paperwork would have been finalized by summer. I flipped through more of the photos. One showed a heavily redacted contract, but the signature fields were visible. Tammy's name was there. So was a second someone named Josiah Marin. "He's the founder of Paragon Ridge," Drew said. "And he's been named in 3 separate investigations in California, Nevada, and Utah. No convictions, but every case ended in settlements with non-disclosure agreements." Tori joined us later that day. When she saw the file, she exhaled sharply and pulled out her laptop. "If Marin's involved, this goes deeper than we thought," she muttered, typing rapidly. "He doesn't just skim, he restructures entire communities into debt traps, raises dues, imposes impossible compliance standards, then uses those violations to seize homes." "Like a private foreclosure racket," I said. "Exactly. In some states, HOAs can place liens faster than banks. He's weaponized that. We spent the afternoon cross-referencing property records, court filings, and archived HOA newsletters from other neighborhoods. Patterns emerged. In each case, a rogue board accumulated power under the radar, used intimidation to silence dissent, then partnered with Paragon Ridge under the guise of financial sustainability. Within a year, dues had tripled and multiple homes were seized. Oak Haven had been on the brink. By evening, we had enough evidence to present to the Arizona State Financial Crimes Bureau. Drew made the call. They weren't surprised to hear Marin's name, but they were surprised by how much we had. Within 2 weeks, a multi-agency task force was assembled. Federal investigators joined the case, citing interstate fraud, racketeering, and unlawful seizure of residential property. A sealed indictment was filed against Marin and several of his associates. They moved quickly and quietly. One morning, unmarked vehicles lined the entrance of a gated development in Chandler Paragon Ridge's regional office. Marin was arrested along with 2 executives and an attorney who had previously worked under a different alias. The charges ranged from wire fraud to conspiracy to commit real estate theft, but one charge stood out: organized criminal enterprise. Tammy's cooperation had given prosecutors leverage. Her testimony placed Marin directly in the planning of Oak Haven's financial transition. Including details about bonus incentives, he offered her and 2 other board members for pushing the deal through. The court considered it premeditated asset stripping. Marin's trial became a media storm. He was represented by a polished defense team that tried to argue he was simply modernizing outdated communities. But the evidence was unrelenting. Internal communications, forged violation notices, falsified ballots for board appointments, and even a recorded call between him and Tammy where he described homeowners as low-hanging fruit. The jury took less than 6 hours to reach a verdict, guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 28 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. The court also ordered restitution to all affected communities, including Oak Haven. Investigators seized over $3 million in property and liquid assets from Paragon Ridge and its subsidiaries. It was over, for good this time. Not long after the sentencing, Tori and I were invited to speak at a municipal conference on HOA reform. We presented the Oak Haven case as a cautionary tale and a call to action. Our panel drew city officials, state legislators, and even a few hesitant HOA board members who, for once, came to listen instead of dictate. Tori laid it out plainly. The issue isn't just bad actors, it's unchecked authority. Homeowners should never be afraid to ask questions. Silence is the fuel for corruption. I added, you can't govern by intimidation, you can't fabricate power and expect people to submit. And if you make the mistake of trying, someone will always push back. After the conference, the Arizona State Senate passed 2 new bills. One required quarterly audits for all HOAs with over 50 homes. The other banned the use of private legal representation without full homeowner disclosure and majority approval. It was a start. Back at Oak Haven, the neighborhood had changed. Without the HOA's heavy hand, people took more initiative. A community garden sprouted in a once unused lot. A new bulletin board was installed near the mailboxes not for rules, but for events, fundraisers, and lost dog notices. Monthly gatherings became the norm, hosted by different households on rotation. I declined every suggestion that I run for anything. I'd had my fill of governance. But I agreed to lead a property rights workshop for other neighborhoods looking to protect themselves. One evening, while I was packing up after the workshop, a woman approached me. Mid-40s, quiet confidence, the kind of person who doesn't speak unless they've already thought through what they're going to say. I used to think HOAs kept things in order, she began. But now I realize they only work when people are watching. You gave us a way to watch, thank you. I nodded, unsure of what to say. It wasn't about me. It never had been. I had just been the first one who said no. On the one-year anniversary of the HOA's collapse, we held a neighborhood celebration. No speeches, no ceremonies, just food, music, and laughter. Kids raced bikes past the spot where the old sign had stood. Someone had planted flowers there, bright, untrimmed, defiantly mismatched. A neighbor approached me with 2 beers and handed me one. "Never thought I'd say this," he said, "but I'm glad you didn't repaint that mailbox." I raised my bottle. "Me too." The sun dipped low, casting amber light across a street that had been reclaimed not just from corruption, but from fear. And for the first time in a long while, everything felt exactly the way a neighborhood should feel.